Last week, the list of products in our world becoming more expensive by the day continued to grow. This time around, it was the PlayStation 5 line of consoles, and it was a significant jump. I'll be speaking from a North American perspective, but these changes will occur across the UK, Europe, and Japan as well. The digital model of the PlayStation 5 will now cost $599, up $100 from its current price point, and up $200 from its launch price. The base PS5 model that includes a disk drive will also be raised by the same amount, hitting $650, a $150 increase from launch. The PlayStation Portal Remote Player will also see a $50 increase, its first price change since it was released in 2023. And finally, the big one, with PlayStation 5 Pro consoles being raised all the way up to a staggering $899, a $200 increase from its release less than 2 full years ago. These are some pretty unbelievable numbers, especially for a console that should theoretically be getting close to the end of its life cycle. Of course, this is not strictly a PlayStation problem. Nearly all tech companies saw huge price increases throughout 2025. PS5 consoles did have a modest $50 increase around that same time, but Sony held off on a major price hike a lot longer than I expected them to. Unfortunately, though, they eventually fell victim to the same external factors that most already have. The economy and world of manufacturing are in complete and utter disarray right now. Whether it was 2025's tariffs, current global conflicts, a helium shortage affecting silicon manufacturing, or AI tech companies buying up the entire world's stock of RAM so you can generate a video of Pikachu storming Normandy, there is quite literally nothing going well right now. If you had just a single one of these issues, it would already cause major complications and maybe some slight price increases here and there. But having all of this mayhem at once is forcing constant, unprecedented decisions to be made. If you feel like you're going crazy, I wouldn't blame you. That's a very fair reaction. This is the 9th generation of video game consoles, a lineage that spans over 50 years, and it's the first time we've ever seen anything like this. Every other console generation followed a fairly similar trajectory. The console releases, a revision comes out a few years later that causes the original to go down in price, and then sometimes around the last couple years we would see a new, cheaper, alternative model hit the market. Because of this pattern, you used to be considered an idiot for buying a console on day one. You were very likely purchasing the worst version of a machine for the highest price it would ever be at a time when the least amount of meaningful games were available. But with PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series consoles, the cheapest MSRP we ever ended up seeing came on launch day. The PlayStation 5 I bought for $500 in November 2020 has somehow appreciated in value. I could theoretically sell this thing when GTA 6 comes out and make a decent profit. That is so bizarre. Throughout the entire history of console gaming, there has never even been a moment where something like that seemed possible. This unbelievable new reality sucks for a lot of obvious reasons. No one wants to see things becoming more expensive, that goes without saying, but I think there's actually a much deeper problem here. The angle I want to pick at today is what I am calling the hidden cost of rising console prices, and that is the decreasing levels of accessibility we are seeing within the gaming industry. Gaming has always been an expensive hobby, there's no doubt about it. Consoles are usually relatively pricey for their time, and so are the games themselves, not to mention all the different peripherals and additional necessary purchases. And let's not forget the modern day price of paying to interact with the online services on a machine you already bought using the internet you also already pay for. But even with all of that said, gaming products usually do find a way to become more affordable, assuming you are willing to be patient and wait. If a brand new $70 video game doesn't fit in the budget, you can wait a few years and find it for pretty cheap. Unless you're a Nintendo first party game, I guess, but you get my point. And the same used to be true for the consoles themselves. If you could hold off that FOMO and stick around on the last generation machine for an extra few years, you could find yourself paying a whole lot less. And like I mentioned earlier, you were usually not only paying less, but also often getting a better product that had been refined. Plus, you would have tons of already released games ready and waiting for you, which had also likely dropped in price by that point.
This allowed people who aren't as financially well off to get involved in the gaming space and stay engaged.
Someone struggling financially knew they could wait it out and eventually be able to afford whatever they wanted. But nowadays, that's not the case. In fact, anyone who wasn't in a position to drop hundreds of dollars back in November 2020 has essentially been punished for it ever since, with the console only continuing to get more and more out of reach. The same is true for anyone who didn't want to cough up $700 for a PS5 Pro back in 2024. And it's not going to stop here. If there's any fiber of your being that wants a Switch 2, or thinks you might want one at some point in the future, you really should go out and buy one right now because it's only going to get more expensive. If you can't afford that at this moment, well then I guess you're screwed. What I'm trying to express is that for a fairly large majority of people, these price increases are not just some minor annoyance.
They are a legitimate barrier to them ever being able to afford a modern day video game console again.
A cynical perspective could argue that people buying consoles and games for dirt cheap years later are actually not all that great for these companies.
And yeah, someone buying a PS4 for $200 on Black Friday in 2017 doesn't really do that much for Sony in the moment.
But that's also a really short-sighted mindset because situations change. Maybe there was someone out there who was in a really tough spot during the 3DS era and could only afford it once the 2DS was being sold for the same price as Mario Kart World. Maybe that same person became a lifelong Nintendo fan from that purchase and now finds themselves with a well-paying job. And so maybe that same person now uses their new financial freedom to buy every Nintendo console and game for full price on day one. What I'm describing is a dedicated customer Nintendo never would have had if not for the affordability of their older devices. But with modern consoles only raising in price, that scenario I just painted would never happen. You are alienating and slicing off a major section of your install base overnight, and they'll very likely never be able to return. Perhaps even more concerning than those who won't return, though, are the ones who will never get a chance to enter the space in the first place. Those of us who grew up playing video games can probably relate to the struggle of begging our parents to buy us a new console. I can remember how my parents used to look at me like I was crazy when I asked for a gaming system that was a couple $100s. Imagine being a kid today trying to convince your parents of a machine nearing the $1,000 mark. Good luck with that. Sony or Microsoft may not see this as a big issue right now. After all, most of their games don't directly cater to kids anyway. But again, while this may not be a super serious problem today, it's going to have massive long-term effects in my opinion. Generally speaking, it seems like most kids today already don't care much about the console landscape. They just want whatever can get them playing Fortnite or Roblox. A lot of the time that's their phone or an iPad or maybe their parents' computer. Even when they do find themselves on a console, I feel like there isn't much care about what logo is on the splash screen. It's just the box that plugs into the TV and loads up games. In other words, they aren't building a connection to a given brand or console ecosystem. It's an experience so different from my own. Nintendo and PlayStation were everyday fixtures in my childhood and teenage years. Having those consoles and games alongside me in such formative years of my life created an attachment that just can't be matched any other way. So if you price out all the young people and continue pushing them away from your consoles, they aren't going to have those same memories. In 10 to 20 years time, when those growing up today have the buying power and couldn't care less about PlayStation, you are forever going to be stuck with the group of us from before that era. There's no way to grow like that, and it could totally tank consoles as we currently know them. As we look to the somewhat near future with systems like the Steam Machine, PlayStation 6, or Xbox's Project Helix, all of these same issues are going to remain. If we assume next generation machines will cost more than their predecessors, I don't even want to imagine what asinine numbers we might be reaching.
I am honestly not sure I have any real solution for this.
Current economic factors and chip shortages are things that these companies have literally zero control over. But all I do know is that something needs to change, and it needs to happen quickly. Because if we are looking at a 10th generation of consoles that breaks the $1,000 barrier, we are going to be in some serious long-term trouble.
I suppose game streaming services like GeForce Now could be a way around this, since they don't require you to have a high-powered rig. But for those of us who enjoy the traditional way of playing games, or for people who don't have great internet access, this being the go-to in the future could be an absolute nightmare. And that solution wouldn't benefit the console manufacturers or the future of that business model whatsoever.
The only tangible thing I can think of is that we as a collective just need to have less of an emphasis on top-of-the-line hardware and photorealistic graphics in order to focus more on affordability. People will say they're fine with this, but in the same breath complain that the curtain physics aren't good enough in Resident Evil, so I'm not sure we can rely on that. We're in too deep with people's expectations of perfection, and to be fair, companies like PlayStation have played into that themselves. Now me personally, you can give me games that look as good as Last of Us Part 2 with steady high frame rates and I'll be all good forever. I really can't imagine ever needing something to look much better than that. A lot of people's expectations are different though, and they understandably want to see those big leaps when investing in a new console. Until that expectation changes, we are going to see prices continue to soar. But for the future health of this medium and of this industry, it might be time to reevaluate that stance. If less technical advancements are what it takes to keep gaming accessible and growing, that feels to me like a sacrifice worth making.